So among the cases of witchcraft and demonic possession that emerged in England, I can post no problem at all. Okay, that emerged in England at the turn of the 17th century. Some were widely accepted as true demonic afflictions, while others became so controversial that not only the cases, but also the participants' fortunes unraveled as a result. Because the stakes were so high, participants sometimes published accounts that attempted to contain these chaotic events within recognizable scripts. My paper today examines cases in which the boundaries between good and evil appeared to blur, either because the demons transformed from evil into ambivalent figures, or because people who attempted to perform holy possessions by good spirits also experienced demonic assaults. Such cases required observers to trust that the demoniac, as those who acted as if possessed by demons were called, could properly discern the difference. Godly authors knew that they should not heed spirits, however angelic they appeared to be, but their attempts to resolve the case's demonological inconsistencies highlight the contradictions within Puritan, Anglican, and Catholic approaches to these phenomena. As a result, these sources contributed to a centuries-long argument about how properly to discern evidence of the preternatural without falling victim to demonic sensory or worldly delusions. So demons in early modern England ought to have been fundamentally unambivalent if we take seriously the idea that they were meant to be the embodiment of all evil and devoted to Satan's overthrow of Christianity. And yet for centuries, theologians noted that one of the devil's primary intents was to deceive. And because perception of demons necessarily passed through the senses, which were notoriously fallible to natural as well as preternatural delusions, spirits were inescapably ambivalent. One result of demonological debates about what constituted reliable discernment was that regular folk who performed a persuasive godly possession often encountered clergy or jurists who insisted it must be demonic delusion. This ambivalence increased the difficulty faced by those who published accounts of witchcraft possession, by which I mean cases in which the people who acted as possessed also named a witch as the cause. The astonishing power of possession to bring about religious renewal and to gain converts jarringly collided with the challenges of proving a possession's legitimacy and fixing it in print. Today, I'll refer to two cases in particular that illustrate the challenges of discerning spirits' true nature and reveal how it was that even when demoniacs succeeded in convincing scores of locals, as well as some clergy and judges, of their possession's legitimacy, it was the worldly authority of the participants that mattered most for the outcome. English demonic possession cases centered on individuals who suffered from stylized fits, convulsions, and torments that were attributed to preternatural malice. In the aftermath of the English Reformation, as the Church of England displaced Catholics and sought to centralize its authority, the Anglican leadership struggled to maintain control of the style and substance of religion. By removing the Catholic ritual of exorcism from the second edition of the Edwardian Prayer Book in 1552, the established church left Protestant England without the official means to cast out devils. Possessions continued to occur nonetheless, and a church that could offer no viable response appeared at a competitive disadvantage. Protestants had rejected ritual exorcism, but some hotter sorts of Protestants, the Puritans, developed a strategy to dispossess those suffering from demonic assaults, exclusively through methods they said used in scripture, prayer and fasting. In the 1580s, when tensions about a potential Catholic threat ran high, some Puritan ministers sparked controversies with the Anglican establishment by putting these premises into action. Ultimately, both possession and witchcraft were difficult for authorities to discern because they involved humans actuated willingly or not by demonic power. Throughout early modern England, most people wholeheartedly accepted the prospect of authentic possession and witchcraft cases, while also subjecting both phenomena to testing and debate. It was possession's communal and performative nature that explains both its power and limitations as published propaganda. Possessions were communal because despite the primary and immediate focus on the demoniac, a possession only became a possession as the result of observation and interpretation. Among the symptoms that denoted possession in this context, the most common were painful convulsive fits and contortions that frequently incorporated a range of related symptoms such as unusual strength, alternating rigidity and flexibility, trances, the emission of strange voices from within. All of you are familiar with these things from conference going in general. Another important component of the possession script was the tendency of victims to see apparitions of the devil, the witch whose malice instigated their suffering, or creatures that represented the devil's servants. For example, around 1595, a group of children helpfully reported the actions of their apparitions for the benefit of the audience. They would say, "Look where Satan is. Look where Beelzebub is. Look where Lucifer is. Look where a great black dog is with a firebrand in its mouth. See how Satan runneth at me with a spear in his hand to stick me to the heart, but God will defend me. Apparitions played an especially crucial role in witchcraft possession because they directed observers' suspicions and provided a kind of spectral evidence. Other symptoms of possession could include the strong aversion to prayer or the Bible, and demoniacs often lost their ability to hear or read scripture. Some of those who acted as if possessed appeared to gain knowledge of secrets or things destined to take place in the future, and others appeared to speak beyond their natural capacity, either by delivering impassioned sermons or conversing in languages they were not expected to know. The paramount question was how to discern the nature and origin of the affliction. For the narrative to work as propaganda, authors had to clarify how a true possession differed from illness, insanity, melancholy, and fraud. To do this, authorities had to assert control over the myriad competing elements of the script in order to transform chaotic symptoms into legible phenomena. So many historians have noticed increased intensity across Europe in demonic possession and witchcraft prosecution in the 1580s and 90s. Such phenomena also intensified during periods of stress and instability, such as during England's Civil War, 1642 to 51. It was in this period that England had its only major witch hunt, which you've surely heard of, from 1644 to 46, when the self-styled witchfinder general Matthew Hopkins oversaw the trial and execution of over 100 people. So today I'll speak about two cases of witchcraft possession, one from the 1590s and one from the late 1640s. Both cases had a great deal in common, so much so that it appears that participants in the latter were surely familiar with the earlier case. Both were the subject of long, fraught, and fractured texts that cannot be read as transparent accounts. Despite the similarities, the earlier case resulted in the successful prosecution, conviction, and execution of 3 witches, while the second resulted in a family's frustration and outrage at what they saw as the judicial indifference to their plight. Published accounts of both the success and the failure hinged on ambivalent demons whose liminal nature remained a considerable problem for the authors. So the first case began in Warboys, England in 1589, when Robert Throckmorton's 5 daughters acted as if possessed and accused a neighboring family of bewitching them. A narrative of the episode, published in 1593 after the trial and execution of the suspects, was widely read and subsequently used as a kind of manual, both by demoniacs and authorities. In addition to linking possession and witchcraft, the case presented a more ambivalent portrait of the afflicting spirits than was common. The demons in Warboys, as articulated first by the afflicted Throckmorton girls and filtered through a heavily mediated text, began as devilish torturers, but transformed into something else. It was during their pursuit of the primary suspect, Mother Alice Samuel, that some of the girls, Elizabeth, aged 10, Jane, aged 9, and Joan, aged 15, reported that the spirits spoke in their ears, foretelling the extent of the bewitchment and torturing them with painful fits. In time, however, the spirits claimed that they now waxed weary of their dame, Mother Samuel, and took on roles more like accomplices. The spirits still had to do their dame's bidding, but they also provided the girls with information to help them resist her. It was through the instruction of the demons that the girls initiated both gruesome scratching rituals to draw the blood of the accused, and also an ingenious strategy to get them to implicate themselves by compelling them to repeat oaths. For example, at one point, Joan beckoned to her sister Elizabeth to join her in listening to the spirits. And the spirit predicted that 3 weeks later, at the scheduled assizes in 1593, one of the suspects would be required to repeat 3 oaths in front of the judge. Joan relayed these for the benefit of witnesses. The first must be, as she is a worse witch than her mother in bewitching Lady Cromwell to death. The second, as she hath bewitched Mistress Pickering since her mother confessed. And the third, as she would have bewitched Mistress Joan to death in her last week of great sickness. And the spirit said, all this is true and shall be proved true hereafter. Sure enough, when the justice compelled the accused to repeat the oath and the girls recovered on cue, and only when the accused spoke the words, it became crucial that these strategies appeared to originate with the demons. More than simply deflecting responsibility for the girls' actions, the demons in Warboys appeared to transform from manifestations of evil into advocates for godly victims, and from servants of a lowly old woman into preternatural agents with individual agendas. The authors of the narrative only partly succeeded in papering over the implications of the demons' ambivalence, mostly through sheer determination to convince readers, as they had justices in Warboys, that this was an unassailable case of bewitchment against innocent victims. That must be answered with the execution of those responsible. The account likely minimized dissent and resentment of the Throckmortons as recent incomers, but the legal outcome helps to explain why the case was invoked so widely for over a century. My second case today is that of Margaret Muschamp, who was about 11 years old at the onset of her affliction in 1645 at Berwick in Northumberland. Unusually, the resulting narrative, published in 1650, appears to have been written by her mother, at least in part, Mary More. So the daughter is Margaret and the mother is Mary. Just to keep it confusing, it's M's everywhere. It's clear that both Margaret and Mary were familiar with the Warboys case, and after Margaret accused a neighbor of bewitching her, along with other people over the course of 2 years, they clearly hoped for a similar outcome. The narrative is a complex and fractured document that introduces a dizzying set of characters, but the part most relevant to my talk today is the ambivalence of Margaret's possession performance, which began as a kind of holy possession with prophetic overtones and evolved into one that featured her visitation by good and evil spirits. The narrative conveyed complete confidence about the girl's ability to know which was which, something initially facilitated by support from the godly minister Robert Balsam. As with the influential cases of the 1590s, much earlier, that had involved Puritan John Darrell, who squared off against both demons and the Anglican establishment, Balsam represented a strong Puritan contingent in an area where the vicars were staunch Anglicans, who regarded dispossession with suspicion. Margaret reported seeing apparitions of demonic and angelic spirits as she struggled to convince authorities of the veracity of her case. The good spirits, she said, were embodied like birds, as big as turkeys, and faces like Christians, but the sweetest creatures that ever eyes beheld. And Margaret demanded to be dressed in clean white clothes in preparation for her angel meetings. One possibility was that Margaret was experiencing a religious awakening, and indeed that may have been what Balsam had in mind when he orchestrated her dispossession and declared her cured. The family disagreed, however, when just 4 months after this intervention, Margaret became afflicted once again. Interestingly, even as she and her mother sharpened their case against those they accused of witchcraft, Margaret maintained elements of divination and angelic visitation, likely to emphasize that she remained an innocent victim and not a witch herself. As historian Diane Purkis has noted, Margaret's performance blurred the line between possession and prophecy, which had its own female tradition. But while a prophetic voice of authority could at times goad observers into action, if they were not so disposed, it became exceedingly difficult to reconcile the dire language of divine consequences with the worldly reality of being an 11-year-old girl, or for that matter, the mother of one. Margaret began to suffer from what appeared to be invisible assaults from armies of demons that mirrored the military engagements of the Civil War. And she alternated between rhapsodizing about the beauty of her angels to spouting dark predictions that the witch's malice would worsen until she could gain access to the blood of those she accused. When she did receive drops of blood from some of them, she immediately improved and doubled down on the logic of the cosmic contest in which she had placed herself. In time, when justices demurred from arresting some of the suspects, Margaret began to make predictions that resembled the oaths of warboys. She reported that her angels had informed her, if the justices and judges at the assizes would not do justice, her own 2 angels, who were always to her like a dove and a partridge, would visibly, to the admiration of all beholders, appear like a man and a woman and justify the truth, if the wicked wretch had not feared them away. So in addition to building in a convenient out if things did not go her way, Margaret gave something for her mother to say to the various justices who pretended ignorance of their accusations. And as an aside, I found in a 1616 publication, someone who says rather breezily, and many people agree that the devil cannot take the form of a dove, presumably because of the dove's importance as a symbol of the covenant with God. But I haven't been able to find other references to that to know if that's something that just thinkers thought or if that was a widespread belief. So if anyone knows more about that, I hope you'll tell me later. Margaret's anger at this disregard of divine commands from her angels eventually amounted to threats. In one fit, Margaret stated that that failure to prosecute would result in deaths, but also if the judges denied her, it would not be well with him. And it will be worse for them who deny us justice than for us. After 2 years of this exhausting performance, over which time Margaret attributed more than one murder to bewitchment and bemoaned how devils had hardened the hearts of people toward her family, she performed a kind of pious deliverance that allowed her to reiterate her essential godliness, even if she had not been able to bring about the spectral demonstration of proof she had foretold. Her mother must have been familiar with skeptics' tendency to dismiss demoniacs by depicting them as sly frauds or lascivious troublemakers, because she took pains to emphasize Margaret's piety, contentment, and how when her fits ceased, she returned to herself as only an innocent, bashful girl without any confidence at all. The narrative insisted that Margaret was innocent and that her mother was suffering in God's name. The interests of both appeared to merge in one of Margaret's final pronouncements, that those that are to do us justice will not. Though they deny us justice, yet God can and will in his due time grant us justice over them all. Margaret's mother printed this challenge, but then ended with a list of evidence against the accused that suggested the matter remained unresolved. So in War Boys, the afflicted girls had described individual demons who tortured them at the behest of witches, but who also relayed critical information about how to entrap and convict those witches. What sounds like an unexpected outcome, that demonic spirits would undermine others in Satan's service to facilitate the deliverance of godly children, would not necessarily have seemed impossible to participants because of the cultural emphasis placed on the devil as a liar and subverter. But the disjuncture between these agendas was just one of the inherent contradictions of witchcraft-possession that contributed to its destabilizing nature. War Boys was a successful witchcraft-possession case in the sense that the afflicted appeared to receive justice against those who harmed them, and the narrative ends not only with their executions, but with the girls' immediate restoration to health and conformity. 50 years later, Margaret Muschamp's possession featured a more structured separation of evil demons and godly angels into warring camps. Margaret's mother crafted a narrative that echoed many aspects of the widely known War Boys case and attempted to force a similar response from prosecuting authorities. The Muschamp case was only partly successful in the sense that some official prosecution did take place, but stalled after officials refused to continue pursuing Margaret's targets. Unlike the Throckmorton girls in War Boys, she did not get justice because she and her mother did not have the support of key people in their community. Instead, Margaret and her mother had been obliged to center the unreliable testimony of spirits in an attempt to claim authority. Margaret's assertion that the spirit said all this is true and shall be proved true hereafter was both wishful thinking and conviction. In the 50 years since the War Boys case, various currents of skepticism developed through intellectual and judicial circles. But the Muschamps did not fail simply because their case happened at a later chronological moment when enlightenment was sweeping away superstition. Most early modern English people accepted the possibility of demons and angels, but it was becoming more difficult to maintain confidence in the mechanisms by which they could be perceived and pursued. The inherently ambivalent nature of spirits meant that it was their interpretation by authorities rather than beliefs about their actual nature that mattered the most. Thank you.